Nationalist. I support nationalism in my country, India, and in all countries around the globe. Today, I am going to be talking about the G7 summit and the BRICS summit and how India went through it and what the outcomes for it were. Let's begin. First, I'll talk about the BRICS. The BRICS are five countries: India, China, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil, um, each representing one letter. And they are five developing countries that formed a group in the late 2000s as a response to the domination of the global economy by the Western developed countries. And they wanted to uh, give a voice for developing countries to oppose them and to kind of create an alternative system. It's mainly an economic grouping. The G7 is a group of Western developed countries. This, they are the United States, Japan, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Canada. So seven. And in each of the summit, the European Union has been included, but it's not a part of G7. There, and the G7 countries are military partners, and the G7 is more political, but it's also an economic grouping, and they work to promote their economic policies within their countries and around the world. I want to talk about how India at these summits has interacted with other countries and what it got from these summits, what were its outcomes, and how it benefited from them. Let's begin. It was hosted by China, and this is the Beijing Declaration. It was a virtual summit, but organized by China. Each summit is organized and hosted by a different country. So this happened in June 2022. They first talked about strengthening global and reforming global governance. They started with talking about supporting calls for reforms of the principal organs of the United Nations, including reform of the UN Security Council. This is a reference to a change proposed in the UN Security Council to include more permanent member countries. The countries that are mentioned are Brazil, Germany, India, and Japan. These are the group of G4 nations. Each of them support each other's bids for permanent seats in the UNSC. The four countries that have supported them are the UK, France, Russia, and US. But China has not supported their goal of membership. And the reason for this is because there's a group led by Pakistan, which opposes India, Italy, and Spain, uh, oppose Germany, and other countries like Mexico, Colombia oppose Brazil, and South Korea oppose Japan. Honestly, as an Indian, the fact that Pakistan would oppose even something like this, which doesn't directly affect them, doesn't even indirectly affect them, is just annoying. Honestly, get a life, for God's sake. To the Pakistani government, I'm not talking about the Pakistani people. They're ordinary, normal people, but the government is just terrible. They they basically said that they want the UN and the Security Council to be more representative, effective, and efficient. This is one of the complaints against the UNSC, that it is dominated by five countries and that it doesn't represent other regions in the world, such as Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. And here, China and Russia reiterated the importance of the role of Brazil, India, and South Africa, and supported their aspiration to play a greater role in the UN. Now, Russia has supported Brazil and India's applications for permanent member status, but China hasn't. So maybe this is a hint that China's uh, in thinking of supporting them, or perhaps this just means that within the UN General Assembly that Brazil, India, and South Africa will have a greater role, but not the UNSC. We'll have to see what uh, happens in the future. And they talked about the G20, which is a grouping of the 20 countries of the world which make up the majority of the share of the world economy. These are basically the 20 richest countries in the world. And the BRICS countries are part of the G20, and so is the G7. So this statement shows that they are not opposed to G20 and that they want it to remain intact and able to respond to current global challenges and wanted a leading role. So then this BRICS is not antagonistic to the West and the developed countries. They also talked about all WTO members to avoid unilateral and protectionist measures that run counter to the spirit and rules of WTO. This is a reference to the US, which imposed tariffs on Chinese goods during the Trump administration. But and this is also done against India, where certain concessions in trade were removed for India, which hurt Indian exports to the US, but not too much. India and the US is India's top trading partner this year, and so this is basically China's statement, but other countries also agree with it. Personally, I'm not sure India should have allowed this statement because India also has protectionist measures in its own country, so which we need. So saying this can uh, encourage other countries outside the BRICS to get us to remove these protectionist measures, which isn't in our interest. And they talked about how the COVID-19 pandemic has caused serious shock and hardship to humanity and unbalanced recovery. This is unbalanced recovery is talking about the sanctions on Russia, which has hurt the economy, the global economy, because it's prevented the world from growing from the pandemic. The momentum has weakened and economic prospects have declined. And they have worked with each other to supply vaccines, diagnostics, medicines around the world. Each of the countries are that India has abstained in voting against Russia. It has not voted against Russia, neither in favor of Russia. Same for South Africa. Brazil has voted against Russia. China has either abstained or voted in favor of Russia in the UN. They also spoke about the humanitarian situation in and around Ukraine and expressed their support to the efforts of UN Secretary General, UN agencies, and ICRC to provide humanitarian assistance. So they want it to be neutral, impartial. So they want both. I guess this means that they don't want the humanitarian assistance to be biased towards either country. Either they want to be given to both Russians and Ukrainians fighting. I think that's what it means, but I might be wrong. Terrorism much. So yeah, this is just them supporting the Russia, India, and China, and all the BRICS also supported preserving the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which basically was a deal between the UNSC, and including Germany and Iran, and the US kind of led the negotiations from the Western standpoint, and this denuclearized Iran said that it made it almost impossible for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon, and promised not to. In turn, the US and the UN removed sanctions from Iran, but when Trump came in, he removed the US from the deal and reimposed sanctions on Iran. That is one decision of Trump's that I greatly disagree with. I think that it just made Iran more aggressive and more likely to get a nuclear the weapon, or at least more of a desire to get one. And I'm glad that BRICS is kind of wanting diplomatic efforts towards a resumption of the JCPOA. The Korean Peninsula, including its complete denuclearization, maintaining peace and stability in Northeast Asia. So this is China because it wants North Korea to be denuclearized. I guess it feels that North Korea constantly launching missile tests and harassing South Korea, like threatening them and the US, is causing too much of a difficulty for it. And this shows that it's willing to get North Korea to kind of remove its nuclear weapons. This is a message to South Korea and the US that they're willing to work with those countries in the issue of North Korea, which I support. And uh, yeah, they also talk about promoting economic recovery. They said they recognize the important role of BRICS countries working together to deal with risks and challenges in achieving global recovery and sustainable development. Global recovery talks is referring to the global downturn that occurred during the COVID pandemic, lockdowns, and they also they want to have sustainable development. So while they will develop their economies, they won't hurt their environment. That's what they're saying. And yeah, they said they encourage cooperation among BRICS countries to enhance the interconnectivity of supply chains and promote trade and investment flows. Interconnectivity of supply chains is basically a reference to how, due to the lockdowns and now the sanctions against Russia, uh, there has been like breakdowns of the supplies of raw materials, resources, goods, and services between countries, especially between Russia and other countries. And so they're going to kind of work way around the US's sanctions so that they can get supplies from Russia and supply to other countries as well. The New Development Bank is a bank established by BRICS. They said that it will relocate to its permanent headquarters in Shanghai and that they're opening an NDB's regional office in India. Work Convention on Climate Change, that they're going to adhere to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. This principle is that uh, a common responsibility of all countries to uh, act against climate change, to reduce it, to mitigate it. But differentiated responsibilities means that each country will have to fulfill different responsibilities because the developed countries have used fossil fuels to develop, and developing countries still need fossil fuels. So developed countries should reduce their uses of fossil fuels before developing countries do, and that they must provide financial assistance to these countries to transition into renewable energy. And they reiterated their importance of exchanges and dialogues among BRICS disaster management authorities. I'm really happy about this, that they're going to work together when natural disasters occur. And they express support to the African Union Agenda 2063 and to Africa's efforts towards integration through the development of the African Continental Free Trade Area and other means. This is obviously lines proposed by South Africa, that South Africa is going to work to develop the rest of Africa and integrate the various countries through a free trade area. And they're going to deepen people to people exchanges. They signed the action plan for the implementation of the agreement between the governments of the BRICS states on cooperation in the field of culture. So there's an agreement between all these BRICS countries for that they will cooperate in culture from 2022 to 2026, 4 years. This is great. This will include digitalization in the field of culture, continue to deepen cooperation in the fields of inter alia, arts and culture, cultural heritage, cultural industry, and cultural alliances. This is an area which the BRICS countries can do very well because they all have rich cultural histories, and this can help the countries understand each other better and each other's cultures and find solutions to any disputes that they have if they have a better understanding of each other. And they also encourage the BRICS Business Council to strengthen cooperation, including in the fields of agribusiness, aviation, deregulation, digital economy, energy and green economy, etc. They're going to have a holding of the BRICS Sports Ministers meeting in 2022. So they're going to cooperate in sports, which is great. Really, like, it'll be nice to see if there can be sports tournaments between the five BRICS countries. And they support institutionalization of the BRICS Civil Society Organizations Forum. This is going to allow social workers, NGOs, activists in all five countries to learn from each other, work with each other, support each other. It's actually interesting because China and Russia don't have very strong civil societies. This shows perhaps they're going to try to change that to allow people to express dissent against them. Although Russia does have protests, it's much freer than China, but it's still not a proper, fully functioning democratic country. They also support the convening of the fifth BRICS Media Forum and the continuation of the BRICS International Journalism Training Program within the framework of forum. So, yeah, there is a media forum in BRICS. They're going to have the fifth one this year. And there's also a journalism training program where they will train journalists in the BRICS countries, which is good. This will allow more reporting from each of these countries, and that this reporting will reach other countries in the BRICS so that their information is shared and people know more about each of these countries. They supported promoting discussions among BRICS members on BRICS expansion process. This is basically a line that was kind of brought in by all the countries, but kind of mitigated and influenced by India because Iran and Argentina applied for membership of BRICS, but India's officials never gave a response. So this shows that India is not immediately accepting new members. It wants some criteria to know how and who to welcome into the BRICS. In the G7, India was a partner country along with Argentina, Indonesia, Senegal, South Africa. And this is what the statement said. This was held after the BRICS summit on June 30th. They supported each other as democracies, that they seek to promote a rules-based international order, respect other states' territorial integrity and sovereignty, and respect and defend the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. Having a rules-based international order is basically a line directed against Russia and China indirectly, because West have often accused them of not following the rules, and in some ways they have not. Russia, for example, intruding into Crimea and Ukraine, although I can understand the moral reasons for that and that there is some moral justification, it is still illegal and against the UN Charter. I've given my thoughts on Russia's invasion of Ukraine in a other video, and you'll see the link for that video on the screen somewhere. And this is also talking about China, which has claimed territories of other countries like Japan, Philippines, Malaysia, and India. This basically was not brought in, but probably supported heavily by India because China has actually intruded into Indian territory a few years ago, and the standoff is continuing. Although China hasn't claimed Indian territory, but there is a standoff along the border which hasn't ended yet, although it has reduced. And about climate change, the G7 said that they will mobilize climate finance and support a just, equitable, and socially inclusive transformation agenda. So this shows that India, probably as a leading developing country amongst these partner countries that were invited, probably convinced the G7 to continue to mobilize the finance that they promised in the Paris Agreement, which is good. This will help countries transition into green energy sources. I just hope that it's done properly and willingly, with everyone, with all countries doing it willingly and not forcing people to change from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuels. I think if the citizens of the countries still want to use fossil fuels, they should be allowed to and not manipulated or pressured into using other green technology. And pursuing concerted efforts to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic and improve vaccine distribution and production. I think this vaccine distribution is again about India because India has been supplying vaccines all over the world and is a manufacturer of vaccine, specifically the COVID-19 vaccine. The um, Serum Institute so manufactured the UK vaccine, the Covishield, and developed its own vaccine, which it's supplied to developing countries. And supporting efforts to push for sustainable solutions to mounting global sovereign debt. This refers to the debt that several developing countries owe to China because it uh, provided infrastructure building services in these countries at a high interest rate, and these countries can no longer pay that interest. And China has claimed some of the areas of these countries. So, yeah, this shows that the G7 is going to work to help these countries service their debt, which I support. That's something India can do in South Asia, especially with Sri Lanka. And they also talked about information environment, protecting the freedom of expression and opinion online, offline. I support this, especially online, because I'm a content creator and I want to be free to express my opinions. I don't want to be censored. So if they can make sure that this happens, it'll be good. And they also talked about the open, free, and secure internet, resilience of digital infrastructure against cyber threats, want to prevent hacking, cyber crimes, etc., and like attacks on their physical infrastructure through cyber means, which they've accused Russia of doing. Although I've not seen any evidence of that, but I think there might be some truths in that, just on a hunch. Quality democracy is promoting equal representation. They want to protect freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. So, and promoting interfaith dialogue. This is good because all these countries, the G7 and the partner countries, have citizens of various religions within them, and they need to allow freedom of religion so that there can be what they call social cohesion, solidarity, in all members of society. They're also denouncing all forms of discrimination and violence. So, if we were to analyze both the summits, what did India get from them? On the BRICS summit, India got uh, greater economic ties. They're going to increase investment and trade between the countries. They're going to get their business council to work to encourage businesses in their countries to work together in various fields. They also spoke about health, vaccines. So they're going to provide vaccines in within their five countries and to other countries. So this is good for India because it is a manufacturer of the COVID-19 vaccine and has agreed with the Quad to work with the Quad to provide vaccines to Southeast Asian and Pacific countries. And this is being done to compete with China. And the fact that China has agreed to work with India to allow India to supply vaccines under the BRICS banner, not just India, but also uh, vaccines from Russia and China. But India will be dominating this initiative. The fact that China has agreed to this shows that India has a lot of influence and is not allowing BRICS to become dominated by China, even though China is the most economically powerful country in the grouping. And also, India got um, the countries to got the BRICS to not force it to change its stand on Ukraine, but allowed each country to maintain their national positions and only to ask for humanitarian assistance, which is what India's position has been to be neutral, but to provide humanitarian assistance, which India has. And also the cultural exchanges that were offered, that will be good for India because it'll allow uh, BRICS countries, citizens from their countries to visit India and to understand India and to remove doubts and misinformation that they have about India. And so, especially if Chinese citizens come to India and Indian citizens go to China, it can probably create some bonds and emotional ties between the people of both countries, that which will help reduce the disputes that the countries have at a government level. Hopefully, there's no guarantee of that. And in the G7 summit, India's major victory is not having Ukraine mentioned at all in the joint statement between the G7 and the partner countries. Now, in the joint statement of the G7 countries alone, Ukraine was mentioned, but that doesn't affect India because India wasn't part of that statement. But the fact that it wasn't mentioned in the statement that India was part of is good for India because it prevents India from being put against Russia, which is the West has tried to do with India, like not forcing India, but encouraging, kind of asking, requesting. But India has opposed, India has maintained neutrality. And so, yeah, this is why it's good that Ukraine wasn't mentioned. And also, other things that India got from the G7. They've mobilized climate finance, which will help India uh, build more renewable energy technology and green technology. India is already a leader in this, not just among developing countries, but even compared to other developed countries, it has increased the share of renewable energy in its energy sector. And has been implementing most of its promises in the Agreement. So this will be good for India if it can have access to finance to uh, develop technologies. And the talk about having a free and open internet helps India because India is digitalizing at a very fast rate and needs internet to be open and free so that people can express themselves freely and content creators like me can benefit from it. So yeah, India has benefited from both summits, but differently. Uh, G7 was mostly about uniting democracies and focusing on that kind of soft issues like freedom of expression, civil society, etc. While BRICS were mostly focused on bread and butter issues like economic ties and stuff like that. So both are needed, and I'm glad that India has got stuff from both summits. And I don't think that there's a need to choose between either of the groupings, but India can continue to engage with both. And I just want to end this video by wishing good luck to my country, India. If you like that video and want to see other videos about India current events, click here. If you want to see my previous video, click here. If you want to see the sources I use for this video, click the links in the description below. Thank you for watching. Vande Mataram.